I have very mixed feelings on Atlas Fallen, the newest game from developer Deck 13, known for making the Souls-like Surge series. As I was approaching the last fourth or so of the game, I thought I had a good grasp on what I would say for a review. Atlas Fallen is fundamentally good, but weighed down by odd combat design decisions and technical issues, but nevertheless, well worth your time if you're a fan of action games. Then I encountered a late game boss, where some of the poor combat design and a host of technical issues just melded together into the absolute worst combat experience I had in any game of 2023. In addition to being the most difficult fight in the entire game, where you can easily die from an untold number of attacks you barely have time to react to, I had to restart this encounter 3 separate times. Twice because the boss glitched and I could no longer damage it, and once because my game simply crashed. And the cherry on top was that each time this happened, I had the boss's health over halfway gone. So I'm sure you can imagine my frustration. Now luckily no other boss fight or enemy encounter was this acutely terrible, but it does call into question how much one awful experience should impact your recommendation of a game. On one hand, I acknowledge that most people by nature will have a different experience than I did. Some will have better builds, be more skilled, etc. On the other hand, if there is a chance that players do have the same experience I did, either with this boss or another, where the lack of polish impedes your progress just as much as the boss fight, then I simply cannot feel good giving the game a wholehearted recommendation. Therefore, despite pre-ordering the game and enjoying my time with it, I simply cannot recommend you buy Atlas Fallen. At least not at full price, or at least not until the developers patch out the bugs currently plaguing the game. That being said, there is a lot to love here, and you might be listening to this review after the game has been fixed or you find it on sale. So with that being said, let's get into Atlas Fallen. Like Monster Hunter, everything you need to understand about Atlas Fallen is in the title. The game setting is Atlas, a world ravaged by sandstorms and haunted by sand monsters known as wraiths. What's worse is Atlas is ruled by a tyrant god named Thelos, who forces a caste of nameless slaves, known as Unnamed, to mine a magical mineral known as Essence for unknown reasons. You play as one of these Unnamed using a fairly generous character creator, and one day your caravan of fellow slaves and taskmasters is attacked by a horde of wraiths. Following the attack, you stumble upon a gauntlet of immense power, yet possessed by an amnesiac spirit, who in turn lets you know that if you can restore the gauntlet to its full strength, you might just gain the power to overthrow Thelos. Now, I don't know why 2023 is a year of games with talking accessories, but for what it's worth, I can confidently say Atlas Fallen is the best one so far. Yet before you go about overthrowing mad gods, you'll have to find the Knights of Bastengar, a mythical order of warriors that fell to Thelos and his avatar queen 10 years ago. They disappeared following their defeat, and they were the last ones in possession of the gauntlet, and it was due to their inability to control its power that they lost in the first place. And if you don't find them and learn what they know, you might end up with the same fate. I would say the story is very conventional, and that's not necessarily a bad thing so long as the tale is well told. Unfortunately, while the lore of Atlas Fallen is interesting, the narrative execution leaves a lot to be desired. Exhibit A: should you choose a male character, you'll be subjecting yourself to very mediocre voice acting. No matter what emotions the situation may call for, it seems like your character cannot muster anything more than sounding like a vaguely concerned automaton.
The situation is dire. We have lost family. The guards are as much a threat as the storm. We need to act.
My father tried to teach me human emotions. They are difficult.
In general though, voice acting is all over the place, and it made me wish that all dialogue was delivered through text. And speaking of text, unless you're willing to go out and explore the world, you're going to be missing a lot of the game's lore. Many key elements are simply relegated to scrolls, and while it may streamline some of the exposition, I do feel like some information that should have been expressed explicitly was instead placed in collectibles. This actually ends up doing a disservice to the characters because it means they don't have a lot interesting to say and are painfully one-dimensional. This isn't helped by the fact that unnamed characters are named after their vocation, making them seem even more one-dimensional than they already are. For example, your character is called the Gauntlet Bearer because you carry the gauntlet. A tracker is called Tracker, and a lookout is something like Seeker or something. Does it make sense for the world? Yes. Does it also seem silly? Yes. I do think the bones of a good story are buried somewhere within Atlas's sands. But as it stands, it is simply not a compelling reason to buy the game. That honor instead goes to the gameplay. Gameplay is where Atlas Fallen really shines and shows a refreshing amount of ambition and innovation that completely carry the experience. Most notably are the traversal mechanics. The world of Atlas is covered in dunes, and with the power of the gauntlet, you're able to literally surf the sands and make your way from point to point. It's very rare that a mechanic won't overstay its welcome across an 18-hour playthrough, yet I can say with complete honesty that sand surfing never did. And it's a good thing too, because it covers for a fairly generic open world. Open world might be too generous a term though, because it's more akin to the open zone concept of Sonic Frontiers than anything else. Each section of the story is accompanied by its own medium-sized open world zone. Luckily, these zones are pretty varied, taking you to lost cities, ornate temples, and cities in the desert. And at times, when the lighting hits just right, it can look pretty good. A lot of the time though, it can look like an early PS4 game. Now by far, the most important activity is upgrading the gauntlet by finding its missing pieces scattered throughout the open world. Upgrading the gauntlet makes the world more fun to explore, as you'll gain the ability to raise platforms, crush seals, and use an air dodge so generous that it's basically like flying. Now before discussing the other activities you can do, it makes sense to clarify how these activities feed into the game's systems. Firstly, despite being an action RPG, your level is exclusively determined by your armor, and you'll need to consistently upgrade various armor sets with essence dust in order to keep pace with the game's challenge. And every time you do upgrade an armor set to the next level, you gain a perk point that can be used on something that typically just adds quality of life changes to the game. Now, most activities grant you essence dust, like fighting enemies, but there are other things you can do like breaking altars of Thelos that grant you a significant amount as well. This also includes most side quests, with the main issue here being that many of the side quests simply aren't all that fun, with so many of them just asking you to find something or someone. Find the missing pages, find the armor pieces, find the suit maker, find my son who was dumb enough to walk into a sandstorm.
Stop.
They're not all like this, but the fact that these are the quests that stick with me after completing the game says a lot. Thankfully, if you ever want to assess whether a side quest is worth doing, you can look at the quest rewards from the menu. Beyond Essence Dust, the next major system is Essence Stones, and while I'll discuss this in detail when we talk about combat, these stones are used to create a build either through passive buffs or active skills, and they can be gained through numerous activities such as side quests and simply defeating powerful enemies. You can also find Essence Stone formula that teach you how to craft Essence Stones using materials found in the open world. And these same materials can be used to make your Essence Stones even more powerful than they already are. You're limited to how many Essence Stones you can equip at one time, so naturally not all the Essence Stones you gather will be relevant to your current build. Again, while this is somewhat mitigated by the reward screen, it won't tell you exactly what the Essence Stone does until you complete the quest. Unfortunately, this can mean that you feel like you wasted your time if you did a side quest you didn't enjoy and got an essence stone that you don't need. And when some side activities are literally asking you to slowly follow animals around, that can be a big problem.
You're wasting my time.
Again, I want to reiterate that despite most of the side activities being pretty middling in their quality, I still had a good time because of how fun it is to move around in the open world. But if you are going to do a lot of side activities in one sitting, I do suggest putting a podcast on or something in the background. Now, combat is definitely the best part of Atlas Fallen. It's cinematic, varied, and even a little stylish. You play with both a primary and a secondary weapon. Holding square will turn your primary weapon into a secondary form, such as turning an axe into a hammer or a whip into a sword. Throw launchers into the mix and you have an engaging but accessible combat system. Across the campaign, you'll gain access to 3 weapons: an axe, a whip, and a gauntlet. And since each of these weapons can transform, you technically have access to 6 weapons. Figuring out which weapon will be your primary and which will be your secondary has a huge impact on combos, as only your primary weapon can be used for launchers. On top of this is the parry system. You have access to a parry that can be activated with the press of a button, interrupts any present action you may be doing, including attacking. The downside is it only lasts for a second, and if you miss the parry, you'll be subject to a cooldown. Land it, however, and you can immediately parry again and do it enough times and you'll freeze your enemies. Naturally, your ability to read enemy attack patterns and parry appropriately will be a deciding factor in how challenging you find Atlas Fallen. This entire system is undergirded by something called momentum, which is represented by a blue bar that fills as you attack enemies. As mentioned earlier, you can equip a mix of essence stones that grant buffs and active skills. Essence stones are divided into 3 different tiers from bronze to gold, and spread across 5 different categories affecting things like offense, defense, health, and momentum gain. As your momentum bar fills, you gain access to the passive buffs and active skills granted by your essence stones from bronze to gold. And as you fill each tier of the momentum meter, your character becomes stronger, and not just because of your essence stones. Your weapons literally get bigger and more powerful, granting you access to different combos. This creates a cadence to each fight where you start weak but become strong. That is, so long as you don't get hit, because getting hit can actually drain your momentum. As each tier of the momentum bar fills, you gain access to a shatter ability, sort of like a super move. And just like in a fighting game, if you let the meter fill all the way, you'll gain access to your most powerful shatter ability. These shatter abilities are very cinematic and can easily turn the tide of a tough battle if used correctly, especially because they can be used to freeze enemies in place and give yourself breathing room if you're getting overwhelmed. Therefore, the typical flow of a fight is to get your momentum bar as high as possible so you gain access to your most powerful moveset, and when you're able to kill the enemy in one shot, release your shatter ability. It's a good system, but I really would like to see it refined in a sequel, because there are simply some design decisions that I don't really understand. Namely, as you increase your momentum, you gain more attack power, but you also take more damage. This means that you could be doing extremely well in a fight but get attacked by an off-screen enemy and just die because your momentum is too high. It's weird because it kind of punishes you for playing well. And moreover, these kind of risk-reward systems are something that games typically give you the option of opting into. Instead, in Atlas Fallen, you simply don't get a choice. You are going to take more damage the better you do. And the only way to mitigate this is to make sure your momentum is never that high, which is impractical when considering that some essence stones only activate when the momentum bar is completely full. I just don't think this system was that necessary. And the game already has a weird combat cadence because you always start every encounter feeling weak, and don't really start to feel strong until your momentum gauge is around halfway full. It makes every encounter feel like you're starting as base Goku but ending as a Super Saiyan, if a Super Saiyan was a glass cannon. Additionally, combat feels incredibly floaty and there is a half-second delay with each button press. But overall, I really appreciate this combat system for the new ideas it brings to the table. However, like many new ideas, it really needs some refinement to bring out its full potential, and I hope we get to see that in a sequel. The thing is, I'm not sure we'll ever see one. Buying Atlas Fallen right now feels like you're buying into a startup. You can see its potential, but you're unsure if it will ever reach the levels of success it needs to be sustainable. And frankly, in a year of so many excellent releases, it's hard to justify telling someone to buy an experimental game with issues both in its gameplay and on a technical front. Nevertheless, if you like action games and you see Atlas Fallen on sale, I think it's worth getting. But let me know your thoughts down below. This has been Harlan Gaming, out.